The small rectangle glowed with an impersonal certainty on his desk. 5 words, a period, then 3 more, followed by another period. I found someone else. Deal with it. The fluorescent hum of the office, usually a dull irritant, sharpened into a buzzing static around his ears. Wednesday afternoon, an unremarkable workday unfurling with its usual rhythm of spreadsheets and calls, now fractured. There had been no tremor in the earth, no storm brewing on the horizon, not even a whisper of a shift in the air. Just this stark declaration, lobbed into the carefully constructed edifice of his life. A breath hitched, then released, almost soundless. Finally, the word bloomed in his mind, quiet, absolute. Not a question, not an explosion. A simple, undeniable affirmation. It felt like the unlocking of a door he hadn't realized was chained shut until the mechanism clicked. He didn't pick up the phone. He didn't rage. He didn't even clench his jaw. His gaze remained fixed on the screen, the pixels holding the weight of a 4-year engagement, 8 months of wedding planning, countless shared moments now rendered hollow. The initial shock, strangely, wasn't the betrayal itself. There had been signs, subtle as cracks in old plaster, which he consistently painted over with convenient explanations. No, the real surprise was the tone. Casual. Dismissive. As if she were merely canceling a long-standing appointment or discarding a worn-out garment. She expected a reaction, he knew. A deluge of calls, a flurry of desperate texts, perhaps even him driving home in a tear-filled panic, ready to fall apart at her feet so she could witness the full, dramatic weight of her decision. He simply closed the message. His fingers, oddly steady, moved across the keyboard. The clack of keys against the quiet of his office felt like a deliberate beat, a counter-rhythm to the chaos she tried to unleash. He accessed his online banking. The joint checking account, the one where his direct deposit landed every 2 weeks, was the first to fall. He rerouted his pay, a few clicks solidifying a future without shared funds. Then, with careful precision, he transferred out his portion, leaving just enough to cover any stray, already cleared expenses. He wasn't one for sloppiness. Documentation was paramount, especially in finance, especially now. Next came the subscriptions, a digital tapestry woven into the fabric of their cohabitation. Her phone line, tied to his plan, was cancelled, the number ported to a new, dormant account he controlled. 6 hours, maybe 7, before her service would wink out of existence. Streaming platforms, their shared watch lists now irrelevant, were logged out across every device. The cloud storage, where countless shared memories and documents resided, was downgraded to the free tier. He felt a grim satisfaction as he recalled her annual promise to use that gym membership, always around New Year's, always unfulfilled. It would freeze automatically now, the payment card soon to decline. Car insurance. The policy was in his name, she was a listed driver. He removed her. Roadside assistance, the service she'd tapped twice in 18 months without a thought to who absorbed the cost, suffered the same fate. The emergency credit card, accessible to her since their 2nd year, which he paid off in full every month without comment, was cancelled. He reset passwords on everything connected to his identity, banking, email, utilities. Not to lock her out of the apartment itself, that would invite legal complications he had no desire to navigate, but to sever every thread of his financial life from hers. He packed a single bag. Clothes, documents, his laptop, the essentials. No farewell speech, no slammed doors. Nothing dramatic for her to screenshot or dissect. He drove away from the apartment, the quiet engine a stark contrast to the churning thoughts in his mind. He stopped at a drive-thru, the familiar scent of fried food a strange comfort. Bacon burger, no onions. His decompression order. He found solace in a friend's spare room, its unfamiliar walls a welcome blank slate. His laptop hummed to life, and he finished the administrative work he'd started earlier, methodically untangling the last threads. That night, a text. From her. The tone was not the casual dismissal of earlier, but confused, edging towards irritation. Asterisk, why wasn't her phone working? Why had her grocery order been declined? Asterisk, she threw in a barb about him being immature and petty. He didn't reply. The next day, her calls became a relentless assault, from numbers he didn't recognize. Emails accusing him of financial abuse piled up in his inbox. The messages swung wildly, insults alternating with half-hearted attempts at reason. Asterisk, he was overreacting. Other couples got through worse. He was just proving her point about his insecurities. Asterisk, she cycled through every angle, waiting for one to pierce his silence. But what he truly noticed was the consistent absence of apology. Not once did she open with remorse. It was always, asterisk, what have you done to my phone? Why is my card not working? You're being ridiculous, asterisk, every message framed around what he had done to her, never what she had set in motion. She wasn't reacting to the loss of their relationship, she was reacting to the sudden, jarring loss of her comfort. Then, a voicemail. Formal, crisp, the timbre of a professional. It requested he return the call regarding an urgent matter, representing his fiancée in a domestic financial dispute. He hadn't anticipated a lawyer. She truly believed her entitlement had legal standing. He listened to the man's smooth assurances, the polite cadence that suggested he'd heard only one polished version of events. Concerns about shared assets and abrupt withdrawal of support, the words hung in the air, heavy with implication. He called back, keeping his voice level, his words concise. We are not married, he stated. There is no joint lease. No prenuptial agreement. No written expectation of ongoing financial support. Every account I've closed is solely in my name and funded entirely by me. Then, the crucial question, delivered without inflection, could you clarify the legal basis you believe exists for this conversation? A pause stretched, not dramatic, but calculating. The lawyer offered to meet amicably. He declined, insisting on written communication only. The lawyer mentioned his client felt blindsided, destabilized. Your client sent me a message ending our engagement and announcing a new relationship with no prior discussion, he countered. My response was to disengage financially and personally. Again, where is the legal issue? The lawyer didn't answer directly. The call ended under 4 minutes. Immediately after, he typed a meticulous timeline, the exact minute her text arrived, the timestamps of every account closure, the legal status of each. He emailed it to himself, a pristine, time-stamped record. Finance had instilled in him the absolute belief that paperwork mattered, even before you knew it would. Her next volley, conveyed through the lawyer, softened. Asterisk, she never meant it that way. She was emotional. She assumed they'd talk like adults. His response was extreme, vindictive, a reflection of his character asterisk, and then, the true audacity, a list of specific expenses she believed he was still responsible for covering until she got back on her feet. Rent, utilities, phone, groceries, personal expenses. She even used the phrase, transitional support. A flat, clean realization clicked into place for him. This had never been about heartbreak. This was pure entitlement, now laid bare, bold because she thought she had nothing left to lose. His reply was brief, direct. The engagement is over. There will be no further financial support. All future communication should go through her lawyer. Then, he blocked her number. Within the hour, the lawyer called again. His tone had shifted from confident to careful. He asked if he had time to talk. No, he replied, send your concerns in writing. The email arrived minutes later, shorter than expected. No demands, only questions. Clarifying questions about the lease, the accounts, whether he'd ever promised continued support in writing, whether any wedding deposits were refundable. The shift was telling. The lawyer had done his due diligence, quickly realizing there was no hook, no legal ground. Around the same time, she found a loophole, messaging him through a mutual friend's social media account. The tone had flipped back to aggressive. Asterisk, he was trying to ruin her life. punishing her for honesty. Real men didn't walk away when things got difficult. He didn't respond, but he took screenshots. When someone starts rewriting history before the dust even settles, you document quietly. That evening, he returned to the apartment while she was out. He took only what was definitively his: clothes, documents, his remaining electronics. Before leaving, he photographed every room. Clean. Undamaged. Everything in its place. He left his key on the kitchen counter. No note. The next morning, another email from the lawyer. His client wanted to explore mediation rather than escalation. Mediation? There was nothing to mediate. No shared future to negotiate, no joint assets to divide. He replied in writing, the engagement was terminated by her message. No marriage occurred, no joint assets existed. I will not be participating in mediation. Any further contact should be limited to written communication regarding property retrieval if needed. 2 hours later, her final email, from her own account, before he blocked that too. Long, bitter, a torrent of accusations. Heartless. The new guy would never treat her this way. She expected better from someone who claimed to love her. She truly believed this would wound him. What she hadn't grasped was that the moment she sent that initial text, she had ceased to be his responsibility. The first real tremor she felt came with the rent reminder. An automated email, simply asking for payment confirmation. She forwarded it to him with 3 terse words, *, this is due tomorrow. What are you doing? *, he did nothing. The second hit was the car. She called a mutual friend in a panic, the insurance app refusing to load, roadside assistance telling her she wasn't covered. She'd always assumed car insurance was like gravity, just there. It had never occurred to her it was something a specific person meticulously maintained every month. By the end of that day, the tone of her communication had shifted again, from anger to something closer to fear, a concrete, practical fear about her actual situation, not just frustration about his. Fear, he noted, expressed itself differently than anger. Anger shrieked in all caps, fear spoke in short, clipped sentences, questions about specific things. *, when is the insurance active until? Is the card permanently cancelled? Are you coming back to talk? *, she was doing the math now, in real time, and the numbers weren't adding up the way she'd anticipated when she'd typed those 5 words. His reply, a single sentence, there is no legal or moral obligation for continued support following a termination initiated by your client. The calls stopped. About a week later, he heard through a casual acquaintance that she was moving out of the apartment. Not upgrading, but downsizing, crashing at a friend's place. Selling some of the things she'd quietly made comments about when he'd carefully and frugally acquired them. The irony, sharp and undeniable, settled in the air. That same afternoon, he officially canceled the wedding. He lost the deposits, took the financial hit without a moment's hesitation. Venue, catering, down payment, photographer's retainer, $8,000, gone. It wasn't painless. It was real money. But it was a fixed cost, a known quantity. Pay it, file it, move on. The alternative, staying in that corrosive situation, absorbing her constant friction, waiting for things to balance out, that was the open-ended expense. That one had no ceiling. And he already knew how it ended. He didn't feel victorious. He felt a profound, settling calm. The kind of calm that arrives when you finally stop arguing with reality. One afternoon, truly immersed in work for the first time in days, he realized he hadn't checked his phone in 3 hours. Not because he was avoiding it, but because there was nothing he needed to see. No dreaded calls, no messages he had to brace himself for, no anxious background hum. It felt like a small thing, almost trivial, yet it struck him deeply. 3 months ago, his normal Tuesday would have been a long, low-level tension punctuated by spreadsheets. He hadn't realized how much energy he'd spent managing the ambient stress of the relationship until it was simply, utterly gone. The silence, when it came, wasn't empty. It was organized. Like a room after you finally clear out the furniture you'd been walking around for so long you'd stopped noticing it was in the way. Public pressure followed. Messages trickled in from people he hadn't spoken to in months, her cousin, an old coworker of hers, a mutual friend who suddenly needed to understand both sides. That phrase, he knew, was always a tell. It never meant neutrality, it meant someone had been fed a version of events that needed external validation. She posted online. Nothing with his name, but enough for anyone in their shared orbit to connect the dots, strong woman quotes, defiant pronouncements about men who couldn't handle honesty, vague posts about rebuilding after emotional damage. These collected a flurry of supportive comments from people who had heard only her carefully curated narrative. The campaign felt draining, even from his distance. She was working harder to manage the story's perception than to solve her own escalating practical problems: overdue rent, uninsured car, phone reconnected on a cheaper plan. He didn't reflect on it then, he simply ignored the messages. His silence, he instinctively knew, would do more damage to her narrative than any argument he could ever offer. She needed a response to keep her version alive. He gave her nothing. The mutual friend, the one who genuinely reached out, had always been someone he liked. They'd shared laughs when things were good. Her initial message had been warm, asking if he was okay. They exchanged a few texts. She clearly operated from a version where he'd simply snapped and cruelly pulled the rug out from under his fiancée. He gave her the short, unvarnished account of what had actually happened. She went quiet after that. He didn't know if she changed her mind or simply chose to disengage, but he never heard from her again. That was fine. He wasn't seeking validation, just unwilling to let her narrative stand unchallenged with someone he respected. Even his mother received a message from her, filled with appeals and a desperate hope that she could talk some sense into him. His mother forwarded it with a simple, "Are you okay?" He told her yes, walking her through everything plainly, devoid of emotion, just the facts in order. Her reply was succinct: she was proud of him for standing firm, and his father would have said the same. That door closed quietly. The final official communication was a legal-looking letter from her lawyer, but it read more like a plea born of panic than a calculated strategy. It outlined emotional reliance and implied expectations, but made not a single concrete legal claim. It asked again for discussion. He didn't respond. 2 days later, a short, neutral email from the lawyer: his client would not be pursuing the matter further and requested confirmation of item pickup timing. That was it. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just retreat. The noise stopped completely. No more posts. No more roundabout messages through friends. This silence felt different. Not tense. Final. Once the noise stopped, he noticed the profound quiet within his own head. Not empty, but organized. His expenses had dropped immediately, without any additional effort on his part. No background drain, no small recurring charges he'd stopped noticing, no low hum of stress about whether her freelance work would cover her share this month. His accounts stabilized in a way he hadn't realized they were failing to do. The emotional change was real, too, but not in the way people often expected. He hadn't spiraled. He didn't miss her in the way he'd assumed he would. What he missed was the version of a future he'd already outgrown long before any of this began. Once that was gone, there was nothing left to argue with. Friends checked in, and he told them the truth. He was relieved. Not just that the relationship ended, but that it ended cleanly. No prolonged bargaining, no drawn-out collapse, no months of maybe we can still work through this. Just a clear line and forward motion. He also had to sit with the difficult truth that he wasn't blameless. He had allowed things to fester longer than they should have, talked himself out of red flags because he didn't want to be the guy who blew up a 4-year relationship over a dinner comment or a recurring complaint. Looking back, he hadn't been patient, he'd been avoidant. He'd waited for things to magically balance themselves out, because having the actual, difficult conversation had always felt like a greater disruption than simply absorbing the friction. That was on him. He owned that. But there was a fundamental difference between not handling something perfectly and deserving what she did. He knew where that line was. About a week after everything went quiet, she tried one last time to reach him directly. He was walking back from work when he spotted a car he didn't recognize, borrowed and different from hers, parked near his new building. She stepped out when she saw him, walking towards him as if this were a serendipitous encounter, not a carefully timed ambush. She looked different. Not physically smaller, but energetically diminished. The fierce confidence he'd known for 4 years had dissipated, replaced by something urgent, less controlled. She started talking before he could say anything, requesting just 5 minutes, asserting she deserved at least that after 4 years. No, he said. The single word shocked her more than any of his earlier actions. She laughed once, a brittle sound, as if expecting a punchline. When none came, frustration tightened her features. She accused him of cruelty, reminded him they were engaged and that meant something real, that he owed her a conversation. The conversation ended, he told her, when you sent the text. She tried to pivot, claiming she'd been angry that day, never actually expecting him to walk away. She'd figured finally with sarcasm that he'd calm down and eventually want to talk it through. That, he noted, was the most honest thing she'd said in the entire exchange. She had truly believed he wouldn't actually leave. He let her finish, observing how she continued to frame everything around what she had assumed he would do, never around what she had done. Even in her twisted apology, she wasn't apologizing. She was frustrated that he hadn't behaved according to her script. It confirmed everything he needed to know about the actual dynamics of their relationship for the past year or two. I'm not angry, he told her, his voice devoid of heat. And that's exactly why the answer is still no. Trust, he knew, didn't simply reset because circumstances changed. He wasn't available for reinterpretations of what had happened. She called him heartless again, accused him of punishing her. Consequences, he replied, looking directly at her, aren't punishment. They're alignment. Then he walked past her, entered his building. He didn't slam the door. He didn't look back. Later that night, a text from a new number. One line, I never thought you'd actually leave, that, he understood, had been the whole point. The new guy, he'd heard, had disappeared about a week before she showed up at his building. He only knew because, in one of the last messages that slipped through before he blocked everything, she'd accused him of poisoning the man against her. He'd never spoken to him. The man had simply met the version of her that didn't come with a financial safety net, and decided that wasn't something he cared to unravel. Through mutual acquaintances, he heard fragments over the following weeks. She told some that he'd changed overnight, blindsided her, had been controlling about money. That narrative didn't bother him, it required his participation to survive, and he simply wasn't participating. What stood out most was the clean revision of her own role. Her actual words, I found someone else. Deal with it, were replaced with, I was honest with him, and he completely overreacted. That chasm between what someone does and how they retell it is where trust dies, and stays that way. The apartment was gone. He moved into a smaller place, closer to work. It was quiet. It was entirely his. He slept better than he had in probably 2 years, waking without that low, background hum of tension he'd become so accustomed to, he'd stopped registering it as tension at all. The wedding deposits were a sunk cost, a hit taken without hesitation. Money, he knew, recovered faster than trust ever could. Every dollar lost was tuition paid, a lesson learned before it cost him years instead of weeks. He shifted his routines, focused on work, reconnected with people he'd let drift while he was busy maintaining a 2-person life that was mostly his to keep running. One of those people was a friend from his mid-20s. They'd fallen off because she'd never warmed to him, and he'd slowly stopped making the effort. They grabbed lunch a couple of weeks after everything settled. The friend asked how he was doing. He gave the short version. His friend laughed, not at him, but at the sheer, predictable absurdity of it all. Yeah, he'd said, shrugging, I kind of saw something like that coming. Why didn't you say anything? He asked. Nobody ever wants to hear it before it happens, his friend replied. He was probably right. He wouldn't have listened anyway. She hasn't reached out since, not directly, not through anyone else. He heard through one mutual that she's still working out a more permanent living situation, but he doesn't know the details and hasn't looked for them. The silence has held this time. Because there's nothing left to test. No soft boundary she can work around. No emotional backdoor she hasn't already tried and found locked. It was the cleanest ending he'd ever had to anything. What he knew now, that he hadn't before, was this: when someone tells you exactly how little they value your presence, believe them the first time. Don't argue with it. Don't explain it away. Don't give it 3 more months to see if they really meant it. Just believe it, and then respond accordingly. The other thing he knew was that he wasn't reactive. He was responsive. There was a difference. Reactive meant acting from emotion, saying things you didn't mean, creating messes that took longer to clean up than the original problem. Responsive meant letting the information land, deciding what it meant, and acting in alignment with that understanding. She called him cold. He'd take it. Cold implied he was in control of himself. He was. He wasn't in a rush to replace what he had removed. He wasn't downloading apps or making plans. He woke up in the morning, and the apartment was his, and the finances were his, and the decisions were his. None of that felt like loss. It felt like what things were always supposed to feel like. Is there any true difference between consequences and punishment when both inflict a cost?